it's Reed from Blue Bear Quilts. Okay, quilters, I see you, I hear you, and I know that you have a lot of scraps. So if you'd like a project of making a quilt or a table runner, that both patterns are available in the same pattern, it's called Hugs and Kisses, this is the project for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a Scrappy Hugs and Kisses table runner and or quilt. So stick around and we'll get started. Now, in order to get started with the Hugs and Kisses quilt, we're going to need some supplies. So the fabric requirements are in the pattern, but you're going to need some white fabric. And you're going to need some black fabric. And then you're going to need some scraps. These are pretty nice looking scraps, but they can be really scrappy. They just need to be at least 3/4 of an inch in width. And so you're going to need some red scraps, some purple, some brown, some teal, some blue, some green, some yellow, and some orange. And that's if you're making the whole quilt. Now, if you're making just the table runner, then you may not need all those colors. If you're doing the table runner, you just need red, orange, yellow, green, and teal, because the table runner is basically this first row of the quilt. So what else do you need? Well, you're going to need a straight edge ruler, and this is a good one. This is the Quick Trim and Circle ruler by Creative Grids. And you're also going to need a square up ruler, which this is a 6-inch one by Quilters Select. I think some snips may come in handy. There'll be a lot of pressing, and so if you can have a little mini iron and a mat next to your station, that probably would be helpful. Not necessary, but would be helpful. Another thing that would be helpful, but not necessarily necessary, is a rotating mat, because when you're doing the trimming up of the units, this may come in handy. And then the last thing that you absolutely have to have is you have to have some scrap paper, and it needs to be at least 8.5. Let's see, the size of it needs to be 8.5 by 11. So as long as it's that size, it will work. And I have just a couple examples for you. This happens to be an old U-line catalog where the pages are fairly thin and will tear fairly easy because it's going to be our foundation. And then here's another example. If you happen to have one of these, an old yellow pages, because these pages are also very thin and would be perfect for this project. So those are the supplies that we needed. Now let's get started. One additional thing about the scraps. These were just representative of the colors that you need. But you need multiple pieces in many different shades. So here's a bag I have of some yellow scraps, and here's a bag I have of some green scraps. So you need multiples of these, but this was just to show you what colors you need. So bring all of your scraps that are in these different colors, because you'll be picking and choosing which ones you want to use. The cutting of the materials is fairly easy for the Hugs and Kisses quilt. So for the white, you need to cut some 1.5-inch strips, and then they're subcut into longer pieces that are used in the block units. And then there are some smaller units that are used as sashing to go in between the various units. Then you need to cut some 1.5-inch strips of black, and those get subcut into squares, 1.5-inch squares, which become cornerstones. And then some longer black pieces that become sashing between the block units. Also in the black, you need to cut out some squares, and then those squares are set on point like this, and they're cut in half like this. and you end up with triangles that look like this. And then there's one more aspect to the cutting, and it would be the paper. You need to take whatever your scrap paper is and get it so that it's basically an 8-inch by 9-inch piece. And then along this 9-inch, along the length of the 9-inch side, you cut it in half, so 4.5. You end up with 2 pieces that look like this, and they become your foundation for the block units. So that's pretty much all there is to the cutting. As far as your color strips go, you may need to do some cutting of your scrap material into strips and trim them down with the shears as well. But the cutting aspect of the strips doesn't have to be real exact, which is one of the great things about making this quilt. So next we'll get started making the units. So as I indicated before, this paper is going to be your foundation. So this is a form of foundation paper piecing, but it's going to be super easy and not difficult at all. So the first thing is we need like a strip. I'm going to work on a green unit first. So I need a green scrap that's longer than the 4.5 inches of this paper foundation. And if you want to make sure that you save your scraps, you can leave this because this part's going to get trimmed off. And you also have to make sure that it's sticking out beyond the edge of the paper foundation. And so this first piece goes right side up. Then the second piece goes right side down. And so you can just lay this on here like this. And then we're going to pin it in place so that it will stay in place while we're working on it. If I can get the pin to go in there. Come on. There we go. All right, so on the other side, you can see that our first piece is sticking out beyond. And then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew. It doesn't even need to be a 1/4 inch, but just somewhere along here, I'm going to sew. It doesn't have to be a straight line. It doesn't have to be perpendicular to the edge. You're just going to sew somewhere along here, and you're going to start outside of the paper foundation and go past the paper foundation. So I'll do that on one more piece. The great thing about this is that you can do you can chain piece and do multiple pieces at a time. Now I'll be making one green block, which is going to require 4 of these units. So 2 of these pieces of paper are going to give us the 4 units that we need to create the green block. Now, I just happen to be making the table runner, but obviously if you're making the quilt, there might be 4 blocks of green, which would mean you'd need 16 of these units. So here again, I'm going to take the first one, and I'm going to make sure that it's outside of the paper. And then I'm going to take this next one, and see I even have a little bit of selvage on it. It doesn't matter because it's not going to show. And I'm going to put this right along here. And you just have to make sure that it's longer than your paper. And especially once it gets flipped up, it needs to be longer. So I'm going to put that one right there. And then I'm going to put a pin in it. And make sure your pins are put at least a 1/4 inch away from where you're going to be sewing, because you don't want to sew over your pins or the head of the pin. So again, I'm going to check it on the back. Make sure that that first piece is sticking beyond. So the first piece was put right side up, the second piece is put right side down, and now I'm just going to go to the sewing machine and sew right along there. So I'll go do that and then show you the next step. All right, so I've added this piece, and now I want a little bit longer piece so that I'll be able to do something more at an angle. So I'm going to put this piece on, so those will go right sides together. So along there, doesn't have to be a perfect 1/4 inch, just have to make sure you're sewing both pieces of fabric. And then on this other one, you can see that I've put a larger piece, and now I kind of want this one to go at an angle like that. So I'm going to put it on here at an angle, and I just have to make sure that I'm going to be catching fabric on both sides, and then I'll sew that, making sure that I'm catching both pieces of fabric with my stitch. So I'll do that and be right back. So now we've gone all the way across the paper, and we're to the last one, which that last one is also going to go right sides together, but you just have to make sure that when you flip it over, it's going to cover the edge of that paper. So that one looks good. And then here's this one. We're really bringing up all the fun scraps for this. So again, we're going to put that one right sides together, and just make sure that when it's folded that it's going to cover the end. So I'll go sew those, and then I'll show you what we do next. So now we have sewn all the way across the piece, and the next thing we do is we're going to trim it up even with the edges of the paper. So you can see I've already trimmed up that edge, so now I would flip it around. I would line this up again, and I would trim this side over here. Then I would flip it and trim up at the top and trim down here at the bottom. And once I've done that, I'm going to end up with a piece that looks like this. So in other words, it's just the paper showing. I've trimmed all the excess fabric around. And then you're going to cut this piece in half. So on your ruler, you're going to half of this was 4 1/2, so half of that is 2 1/4. So you're going to look for 2 1/4 on your ruler, and you're going to cut this and trim it in half, and then you end up with 2 pieces like this. And when you flip them over, they look like this. And these are the units that are going to that we'll keep working with. So I'm going to prepare up those other ones, and then I'll show you the next steps. So now we have our 4 center pieces that have been foundation pieced. These are the center part of the unit, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to remove the paper. The easiest way to do that is to fold it back and forth a couple times, and then just give it a gentle tug, and it comes off super easy. This newsprint was really easy to get that to come off. But you just fold it back and forth a couple times, and you'll find that it comes off really easy. It's not hard to do at all. So although people don't like doing foundation piecing and having to tear the paper out, for some reason when you use this nice thin paper and a shorter stitch length, the paper just rips out super easy, and it's really not difficult at all. You see how quickly I'm getting this done on one of these. And if for some reason you do end up with a little piece of paper in there, you can get a tweezers and just pick it out. But there you can see it's all the paper's been removed. It's still holding together nicely. You want to be careful not to stretch it while you're removing the paper. And you'll notice that some of these seam allowances are larger than 1/4 inch. Some are smaller than 1/4 inch. And it really doesn't matter. So, but if you don't like some of these thicker ones, you obviously can come in with your scissors and trim them up if you like. So like this one right here is a little bit thicker. So I'm just going to take and just want to make sure I'm not trimming the wrong thing, but I'm just going to trim this up a little bit. And there we go. So if they're too wide for you and you don't like that, you always can come in here and trim them and make them a little bit smaller. But it's just so much easier to do the piecing and not have to worry about seam allowances when you're doing it. So I will go ahead and remove these and then we'll get started on the next step. Now that we have our foundation paper piece units all sewn and the paper removed from the back, we're going to turn them into units that look like this. So in order to do that, we take our foundation piece and we're going to take our 1.5 inch by 8 inch strips and put them on either side. We're going to flip them over like this. And then it's easiest to sew from this side so that the flat strip is on the bottom, and just line it up and sew 1/4 inch along there. When we've done that, we're going to take and flip this one over, flip it to the back, and do the same thing again, sew that one. And when we've done that, it ends up looking like this. And we press towards the white strips. And once we've done that, we're going to take our little black squares that we cut in half to make rectangles, and we're going to put them on either side like that. And the way we do that is we need to take and, because we want it to be centered, so the way we do it is we fold it in half, and notice that my white strips may not be exactly equal with the foundation piece, and that's just due to the variance in all those pieces of fabric. But basically when I fold it in half, I fold it so that the two green edges are right next to each other, and then I, with an iron, put a deep crease in it. So now you can see we have a little bit of a crease line there and a crease line there. I also take these black triangles and fold them in half and press them to get a crease in them as well. Then I take and line up the crease with the black rectangle with the crease on the white strip, and you want to leave it so that there's like just a couple threads showing. So you want it lined up like that so that there's just a couple threads showing, and then sew 1/4 inch from the edge of that white, so 1/4 inch along that. And what the reason why you're leaving it a couple threads in is that when you then press this to the dark, it's going to give this piece a little bit of extra room on it. So you take and you do that on both sides. You're then going to line up the crease mark that's in this black piece with the crease mark that's there, and also line it up with the other crease over here. And again, line it up so that there's like just a couple threads of white showing, and then sew 1/4 inch along there. And you can chain piece these. You just need to sew from that point to that point. You don't need to sew along the whole length of the white strip. You end up with your pieced units that look like this, and these end up getting pressed towards the black. So in the next step, I'll show you how we trim these up. So now that we have these all sewn together, we need to trim this up into a 5.5 inch square. And so I'm using a 6 inch ruler, but we're only going to be concerned with the 5.5 inch line here and the 5.5 inch line down here. And so I want the corner of the ruler to be in the corner, to be halfway or in the middle of the green strip, and the same thing with this corner down here. I want it to be in the middle of the strip as well. And then the other thing that I'm looking for is I want to make sure that there is fabric above here where I'm going to trim, and black fabric where I'm going to trim here, and that this 5.5 inch line here has fabric contained in with it. There's like a lot there, so I'm going to move this over a little bit. And now we have a little bit more there to trim. And then the 5.5 line down here, there's not a whole lot there, so I'm going to move this up a little bit that way as well. So now we have within this 5.5 inch square, there's fabric up here, there's fabric along here, there's fabric down here, and there's fabric here. And so then we're going to trim up these first two sides like that. And then this is where a rotating mat comes in really handy. And then we do this next side. Okay, and then once we have that, we're going to take and flip it 180 degrees so that now this untrimmed side is up on the left-hand side. And I'm left-handed, so if you happen to be right-handed, you're going to do everything the exact opposite of me. So now we're going to line up our 5.5 inch line with the line that we cut here on the right, and the 5.5 inch line down here on the bottom. And again, we're looking to see that this line is in the middle of our green strip. It's pretty much in the middle up there. There's fabric to be trimmed up here and fabric to be trimmed there. And we're going to take and trim these last two sides. And notice there's a little bit of waste, but it's not too bad. It's mainly a portion of those white strips. And there we go. We have our perfectly trimmed up unit. And we're going to make a, I forget whether the green is a hug or a kiss, but whichever one we're making, we need 4 of these units in order to make a block. So I'm going to go ahead and finish these, and then I'll show you how we put a block together. So now that our units are all sewn, we're going to make the green hug block. And the hug block goes around in a circle like this, so it's like it's giving you a big hug. But the beauty of this is that when we put sashing in between, it doesn't matter if these don't line up perfectly, because you can see they might not line exactly up. They're pretty close, but because we're not putting the trim up ruler in the exact same spot each time, they're likely to be a little bit off. So the sashing pieces in between really help. So we're going to take one of our 5.5 inch by 1.5 inch sashing strips and put them in between here like this. And then we're going to sew one other piece. We're going to put a piece like this with a black square and another piece like that. So we're going to sew these 3 pieces together, which will be the middle sashing unit, and then we're going to flip these over and flip these over, and so this one 1/4 inch right along there, and this one 1/4 inch right along there. These two will just wait until we get all the rest of the sewing done. So I'm going to go sew these 3 pieces, and then I'll be back to show you the rest of how the green hug block gets put together. So now we have the 2 units sewn on either side of a white sashing strip, and notice the orientation of the units for creating the hug block. And then the last step is to place this green sashing in between. So we're going to take and put it on there like that. And so the way these are pressed is this is pressed towards the white sashing, and this is also going to be pressed towards the white sashing. And then when that happens, I didn't do it yet, but when it does, those will nest like that. They'll butt up against each other and they'll nest. And so I'm going to go sew that, and sew that piece to this piece 1/4 inch right along here. And then once that's been done, I'm going to take and flip this piece on, and then sew that 1/4 inch up there, and then the block will be complete, and I will show you what it looks like. So here's the green hug block all sewn up, and everything gets pressed towards the white sashing. And you can see when you do that, it's nice and neat on the back as well. So the next thing is I'm going to make the red kiss block. And so I'm going to have to sew some of these paper foundation squares with red scraps of fabric. And then I'll be sewing the white strips and the black on either of those and creating these units in black. And then I'll show you how the kiss unit gets put together. You know the old adage about measure twice, cut once. Well, I did it, I wasn't careful, and when I trimmed this block up, instead of it being 5.5 by 5.5, it's only 5 by 5.5. So I had to go ahead and make 2 more sets of these in order to have the extra piece that I needed. So let me show you now how the kiss blocks are created. So here is a red kiss block, and you'll notice that the pieces are now oriented this way, creating an X, which this is the kiss in the middle of the block. And so once again, there is a white sashing piece that goes in between the 2 units. We're going to take and flip that over and sew this along here 1/4 inch. Flip this one over and sew this 1/4 inch, and then once that's been sewn on there, we'll take and flip this piece over and sew that 1/4 inch, and flip this piece over and sew it 1/4 inch. And then the center section has 2 smaller white sashing pieces on either side of a black 1.5 inch square, and it's pressed towards the white. And the same thing with this, it's pressed towards the sashing. So I'll go sew that together and then show you what the completed block looks like. So here's the red kiss block all sewn together. And when you press it towards the sashing, it looks very nice from the back side as well. So fairly easy block to make. And now in order to keep working on the table runner, I need to create a yellow kiss block and a teal kiss block, and also an orange hug block. So I'll create those and then I'll show you how the blocks go together. So to put the blocks together in rows for the quilt or the table runner, there is black sashing that goes in between them. And again, this really helps so that the pieces will match up. So on the first 4 blocks in a row, there is a piece of black sashing that goes on the right hand side of the block. And so we're just going to flip that over and sew 1/4 inch along there. And it's easiest to sew this by flipping it over and sewing with the sashing side down and making sure that you're securing all of these intersections as you go along. Now the reason why we're putting sashing in between is, again, to get things to match up. If we were to put the blocks right next to each other, they would look like that. But if we separate them, you see the individual blocks more. So that's why we're putting the sashing in between. So on the kiss block, same thing, just flip the sashing over and again sew it from this side 1/4 inch along here. So I'll do that to all of the pieces and then we'll put a row together. So now that we have the black sashing strips sewn on the right side of the first 4 blocks in a row, and for the table runner there's just 1 row, we sew the blocks together and again we press towards the sashing, so these are pressed in this way. And we've done that in between each block, except for the last one, which does not have any because it will have the inner border on that side, and the same thing with the first one is going to have the black inner border. So now we are ready to put on the inside and outside border. The inside border is going to be black and the outside border will be white. In order to be working with the borders, we have to measure our quilt top, and you measure it in 3 different places. So you start with one end and you measure this direction, and that's close to 11.5. And then you go to the middle section and measure again, and that's 11.5. And then we go to the end and measure this way. That's like 11.25. So when you average those three out, it's going to be 11.5. So where it's too small, you ease it in, and where it's too big, well, actually if it's too big, you ease it in, and if it's too small, you're going to stretch your border fabric a little bit to make it fit. And the reason why you measure in the three places like that and then average it is that's what's going to make your quilt top or tabletop square. Then you have to do the same thing going the lengthwise direction, where you're going to take and measure it on one end, and then you're going to measure it in the center and measure it on the other end, and then take an average of those three, and then that's the length that you'll cut your inner borders. And you want to do that same thing again for the outer borders. So now we need some strips. And what are the strips that we need? We need black strips for our inner border, and we need larger white strips for our outer border. So we're going to take and sew on the ends first. So a black inner border will go here and also on the other end, and then lengthwise an inner border will go on the top and on the bottom. And then the same thing happens with the white outer border. The ends will go on first and then lengthwise. And once I've got those sewn on, I'll show you what the completed table runner top looks like. So here is the table runner top with the borders added. Unfortunately, I can only get part of it in the camera at a time here, but this is it with the borders on. You can see we have a black inner border and a wider white outer border. So now that we have the table runner all pieced together with the borders, the next thing would be quilting. So here are some ideas of how you might quilt this. One real easy way is to just echo quilt these lines in the white. So you take white thread and echo quilt these, which is definitely going to be enough quilting for the block. If you don't mind going across the other color pieces, you could go straight across, and then you could actually drag these lines out into the border, which is going to cause white thread to go across the black, but if you're okay with that, that would be a way that you could keep going. So the same thing is true on the hug block. You're just going to echo quilt or outline, go 1/4 inch in from the edge of these where the seam is, and echo quilt in each one of these white spaces, and that will be enough quilting for these squares. Then notice that the quilt has these mountains and valleys in it, so you could kind of do the same thing in the border, where you could with a ruler take and go like that and like that and like that and create, I guess I wasn't showing what I did. You could create mountains and valleys in your border. That would be one possibility. Or you could just do squiggly lines or free motion quilting in the border. But that would be my suggestions for how to quilt this. And of course you need to layer this with the quilt top. There's going to be a layer of batting in the middle and then backing underneath, and I would suggest a white backing for this to match the border, and the binding is also going to be white. And this quilt top is fairly heavy because when you have all of these pieces of fabric and all of these various seams, the seams overlap and that's creating a thickness of fabric. So the quilt already feels fairly heavy, and so therefore you might want to use a really light batting to keep the quilt a little bit on the light side. All right, here it is, the completed quilt. So this is the quilt version, and at the beginning I showed you the table runner version. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and learning how to make the Hugs and Kisses table runner and quilt, Scrappy quilt. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so that you'll be notified when I post future videos. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.